for you. And we intend to give you a very fine program. So just settle back, relax, and enjoy the moment.
Yeah, I just decided on a whim to hop on and let's have a conversation. Let's have a conversation about policing, very black opinions on policing. We're going to talk about all of it. This is very impromptu, so I don't even know if I'm going to get people trickling in. I don't know, but it's not even about that. You could check out this Twitch stream basically on demand. It's going to be on YouTube on the Tamika Gadsden YouTube channel. You can check out this stream later on Twitch. You can check it out later on Facebook. So hopefully you just have some time in your schedule to check it out. But I wanted to have a conversation because I had some thoughts on Twitter that I just shared this morning after watching some of the Sunday shows, and also just witnessing some of the banter. I'm gonna see if I can look at my Twitch stream on let's see. Okay. Twitch stream on oh, that's weird. Okay, I'm gonna mute it. Let me mute it. I'm trying to see if I'm up here, I'm live or whatever. But no, there's a lot of conversations on Twitter about just policing, about Black thoughts on policing. I see that what's his name? Congressman Clyburn has been making the rounds this past week after the Adam Toledo. Let me get out of here. After the Adam Toledo murder by the Chicago PD, there are factions on the left, on the far left, the progressive left, members of the squad, if you will, Rashida Tlaib specifically, who have really come out explicitly and calling for abolishing the police. And so you have Rashida Tlaib on one side and those of her ilk, and then you have the Clyburns, and then you have maybe even like a Bernie somewhere. I don't even want to say in the middle. Bernie's doing Bernie things in terms of trying to keep the ship steady, complying with Clyburn, and like so. So Bernie's kind of pushing back on Tlaib, and it's just this conversation. And then here in the South, there's a conversation. I think I honestly have not seen enough of the conversation in the South about why Black people like a Clyburn, who hails from South Carolina, why they hold the values, why they hold the views they do on policing. And I remember Free All Along was a book published by the New Press, publishers called the New Press, and Free All Along, I'm trying to check to see how I'm looking on Facebook, if there's anything going over there. Free All Along had some quotes inside, some quotes from Septima Clark about policing, and I remember how that just was like a paradigm shift for me. I remember like just things just changed. Hey Daenerys, if you're still watching, hey Daenerys, buenos dias. So like I started it changed my thoughts, because I'm reading a past account from Septima Clark, who of course has passed on, but I'm reading how she distilled or rather how she interpreted an integrated police force as a huge shift, as a huge sign of improvement. And I had to think, because I was confused. I'm like, wait a minute. So they wanted police, even though, like, if you watch any 60s era or 50s era documentary or movie about how the police so viciously attacked Black people during protests, during the Montgomery bus boycotts, during walks and demonstrations, and various demonstrations in Selma, how the police treated Rosa Parks when she was trying to find justice for Recy Taylor and so many other Black women who were victims of sexual assault and rape and battery, right? Knowing that we have these images of police and police dogs and women women and grandmas attacked by the police. I'm like, well, what? Why would Septima Clark and why would others, not just her, feel like an integrated police force in Charleston be a positive good? And then I had to really just dig deep. And one of the tweets I shared this morning was, it really, like, I really think that you can't talk about conservative Black views on policing. You can't discuss it without considering what it is like to survive Jim Crow, what it is like to survive what it's like to survive apartheid in the South, right? I think if you don't apply that lens, then you'll never really understand why people might not view the police as a negative. And you might be thinking, right, well, Tamika, if the police did so many vicious things and they were involved in lynchings and they were involved in terrorizing communities and police deputized members of the Klan and other white nationalist groups and whatnot, like, well, how could people back then still see it as a positive good? When you go from police to such explicit terror, and I'm not saying it doesn't still exist, it quite clearly does. It's more subversive, it's less apparent, but oh yeah, police are still terrifying Black and brown communities and immigrant communities. I'm not saying that, I'm not making that argument, but I'm saying the way that it showed up before was so explicit, was so they move with so even more impunity than they do now. And when you have something like integration and representation, I can see how folks can see that as marked improvement, if that makes any sense, right? And also I can see how people might view that as justice, in that now, and this is something that I feel like Septima Clark said in her statement, in her quote in the New Press's book, Free All Along, she was saying, there were white people, white allies, if you will, who fought to ensure that Black police officers, this newly integrated police force, that the Black officers on that police force could police white bodies the same way. Like they had power to arrest and hold white people accountable. And I think that also went into the thinking of so many people. Well, we got cops out here now gonna keep y'all accountable, gonna check you on your shit, right? Of course, they not cursing like me, but you get what I'm saying. And so, like, I'm just thinking about that. I'm thinking about how terror showed up. I'm thinking about accounts that I've read within the digital archive from Esau Jenkins about how a constable came on to Wadmalaw Island and dragged a Black person suspected of a crime out of their house, and that or there was a chase. I read, or now I'm conflating two stories, because my father told me one story and then there's an Esau Jenkins story as well. But my father was telling me about the time that the police came and dragged somebody out and just like enacted justice, like a one-man, justice system. And then there was another account, like Esau mentioned, about a Black man being shot dead by a constable, right? And just how things like that, how occurrences like that were pervasive. And so I can see how, okay, now we're going to let Black people on the force. Now we're going to let other people on the force. I can see how that looks like a positive good. And not only, like, I think too, because like when Jim Crow eased up economically, meaning they started courting the Black dollar. So when Jim Crow dissolved and businesses started to court the Black dollar, not the Black, they didn't give a damn about Black people, but when they realized that there was tremendous buying power in Black communities, you saw businesses campaigning for Black customers, not out of a sense of moral, like, evolution, or like moral, like, oh yeah, we get it now, oh, Black people, you deserve to be treated as customers too. No, they were just trying to capitalize off of the Black dollar, the Black buying power. So you start to see more ads geared toward getting Black people's attention and getting Black people's money, right? And so those campaigns were not just exclusive in the commercial space, or when it came time to sell a good or service. You saw active campaigns too to Blacks in terms of recruitment, right? So I'm only assuming that as Jim Crow in its traditional form started to crumble, what did establishments and institutions do to court black people, to give off the era, to give off the perception that, hey, we solve racism. Look, we've got black police officers, right? Tokenism is still a thing. And what I'm saying is, and I'm not infantilizing black people, but what I'm saying is that I can only imagine how that campaign to reach blacks, how that could be perceived as seeing us as humans, seeing us, justice, a milestone. And if that makes any sense, I don't know if anyone's watching and could drop anything in the chat. I don't know, but that's how I feel. But what I wanted to do is I didn't want to just spend this time bumping my gums. I wanted to just lean on some history. Now, this is from I Am Somebody, right? I've been using this documentary often. I've been pointing to this documentary often in a lot of my work, at work and personally. Last summer, someone gave me a clip, and then I went to YouTube, found the whole thing. But it's on, I believe, Vimeo. Please support the makers of this film. I did rip it off YouTube before I even knew that you had to, you could pay for it and support it and all that other stuff. But I'm just being transparent. But this documentary is 30 minutes long. It's all about the MUSC strike led by black women. And it features prominently, Coretta Scott King and other civil rights era leaders. But there was a part in this documentary that we don't talk enough about. And so I'm going to go ahead and play it now. It's about what policing might have looked like as Jim Crow was ending. Now, this is 1970. Jim Crow wasn't over. As Chris Rock said, whenever your state decided to act right? So Jim Crow wasn't over, right? And the vestiges of not just Jim Crow, but the vestiges of slavery here in Charleston were still very malleable, still very visible, still very present, right? But this gives you an idea of what policing looked like. And then you're going to see some of those shifts, and you might say, oh, well, Tamika, that challenges what you just said about black people seeing integrated force as a positive good. It does challenge it, but this is the thing. This is complicated. This is a complicated issue. And I think when we arrive at very neat and convenient answers about why older blacks are more conservative and more pro-police than perhaps progressive younger blacks, we have to understand what it might have looked like. We have to also understand what relief might look like after tremendous terror that was I hate to put levels on this shit. This is very sloppy. But if your terror that your community, your rural community, if the terror that you experienced was at a level 10 and it being ratcheted down to a 7.5, you can imagine how that might have relieved some anxiety, right? It's just complicated. I don't think they're just like we always like to say, oh, black people are not a monolith. Black people are not a monolith. They weren't a monolith then, and they're not a monolith now, right? So I'm going to play this part real quick.
And so the next morning at 5 o'clock, we met at the hospital, and all of us, walked and talked and sang and everything else until so the more we walked and talked, looked like the tougher they got. The tougher they got with us, and they still, wouldn't decide to give in. We was women, and we didn't have no weapons or nothing. I felt like they wouldn't hardly hit us with those big clubs and things because we didn't.
Look at this. This is crazy. Now, you see black cops here. You see black cops. You're seeing a lot of white cops hit black women, but you see black cops. You see this guy right here, black arm. They started hitting unarmed hospital workers, right? You see this.
They had no weapons, and we didn't went out to fight them, not with no fist fight. We went out to fight them, with.
So what I'm thinking about too is how they weaponized, all right? Because we know that policing is inherently anti-black, is steeped in white supremacy. We're gonna get to that too, but I'm thinking about how they weaponized this more inclusive police force. They use that to use these black men to brutalize and to apprehend these black women who are unarmed, who are exercising their right to protest, right? And all of that, and how that could be used against them. It's such a visceral image to me of seeing what that integration meant, and could our foremothers and forefathers have have seen that? Like, could they have seen that this was going to happen if you had more representation on the force, right? I will argue some did, right? And I know that there's things to back it up. I'm not going to show that I don't have access to it, but you had lots of black people who believed in protecting their own community with their own firearms, with their own types of neighborhood vigilance committees and whatnot. That's not even like, that's a learned practice at this point of how to protect yourself and your family. Like, what kind of firearms to have, where do you hide them, where are they stashed in the house so you have easy access to them, so on and so forth. Ways to communicate from one neighbor to the next about things coming, about maybe the Klan coming, about maybe whatever, lynch mobs coming, whatever you want to say, right? So there were factions of black people who believed in policing their communities for themselves. Then you also had, remember now, the emergence of the Black Panthers, who knew not to trust the police, right? Who had seen how policing and how have black cops become like overseers in the traditional sense, like on plantations, right? And so you see a response from like militant factions like the Black Panther Party, who didn't trust the police at all and who worked very hard to tell people, no, we have to police our own communities because the police are not gonna save us, right? So you always had black resistance toward policing, but then you had another faction of folks who say, well, damn it, just give me some fucking relief in the form of representation. Give us a couple of other faces on there, but maybe it'll bring it down. And that's the myth they continue to sell us, right? As featured in the Post and Courier a few months back, right? This big spread they did on more representation in both North Charleston and Charleston PD, right? Like we know that representation does not lead to harm reduction. We know that statistically, right? And those more well versed on that can tell you that. But we do know from what I've read that it takes about 25%, 35%, maybe close to 40% of the force being black or brown, BIPOC, for communities to see some change. But then you go to places like a Newark, New Jersey, and you see that policing is problematic no matter what the faces look like. Policing is problematic no matter what because of the institution itself and because of how folks are trained. It's problematic. All right, so I'm gonna keep playing.
The law on our side, to try to win through the law, not by no fist fights.
So yeah, just seeing that made me think about like what did policing look like in Charleston, right? All right, and so then what I've done before is that I've also leaned on the work of other artists who have not other artists like I'm an artist, but lean on artists who've kind of helped to contextualize some of what we're seeing, and who creates subversive art that critiques the police state or critiques modern day institutions that emerged from slavery. And to me, there are a couple artists that come to mind: Fletcher Williams the third, and also Colin Quashie. Colin Quashie had a exhibition at the Halsey Institute of Contemporary Art. I believe it was that last year before last, right? And within that exhibition, when you went inside the Halsey, you were able to watch this short film. I'm not going to for this short like film about his linked exhibition, but I'm going to play just parts of it about the linked exhibition because it's a subversive way to contextualize things like policing. I don't know if he's going to hop into explaining the slave patrol piece, but I'm going to hop into the PDF that actually explains it if he doesn't say it outright. I'm gonna fast forward to the part right before he talks about linked. So he was, I believe, born in London to folks who came from the Caribbean. Here we go. So let me just do this right here. Let's see.
People see me, and so that's how I see the world. And so my art reflects, that perspective as well too. And I want it to. I want people to look at my.
Well, let me go back a little bit. Is when he was talking about. Let me see. It was one of his first. Well, let me see.
In the Navy, I wrote submarines become really, really, really objective.
No, let me go back. Bear with me. I let it rock for a little bit, and then I'm trying to figure out where I had it. Might have been at the 3-minute mark.
Reflects, that perspective as well too. And I want it to. I want people to look at my artwork and, to see pieces of me in it. I want them to see my perspective. I want them to see and to feel the things that I deal with. And so one of the seminal things they always tell writers is to do what? Is to write what you know. And so therefore I try to paint what I know. And what I know is being a Black American male growing up here in the South. And so my art reflects those issues. The story of art when it comes to anything, any social issue, is to lead. It cannot follow, it cannot run side by side. It has
This is where it starts.
to lead. Artists have to go into any particular topic. They have to be fearless.
What I like about Colin Quashie is like I'm still like I don't understand. I asked my friend Fletcher, like, why don't we see more Colin Quashie, right? Very subversive art that critiques, that blatantly criticizes like these institutions, right? Demystifies it, tells you how it is, tells you how explicitly racist certain institutions, certain images are. Like, that's what Colin Quashie, he's very fearless in his indictment of white supremacy, especially white supremacy and all of its iterations in the South. I don't know why we don't see more. We see a lot of Jonathan Green, and no shade. We see a lot of Jonathan Green, but we don't see a lot of subversive artists, and we don't lift that up. And I'm befuddled. I am perplexed. I don't know, but he goes at it. I gotta do my digging to figure out more. Hey, Evelyn, to figure out more about this. But he calls out police, and if you had the pleasure of going to the linked exhibition, you saw all of these different allusions or these different references to these things, like getting married on a plantation, right? And how, like, he calls it out. He calls it out. Maybe that's why he's not Jonathan Greening it up around Charleston. Maybe that's why his art isn't wrapping power boxes like we see Jonathan Green's art around, like, power, was it like those utility boxes like at the corner of Windermere or whatever. Maybe that's why we don't see Colin Quashie art in public spaces throughout Charleston.
If you look at the image of Louis Armstrong, with the slave shackled and turned from the horn, where did jazz come from? Many of the jazz individuals or the progenitors of jazz, who were at the start of this, they were the children of who? They were children of slaves. That's where all that comes from. All the field hollers and the chants, led to spirituals, which led to blues, which led to jazz.
I think what made me hop on this morning was just that. What made me hop on this morning is, like, think about the experience of a Black person living through, and I know Jim Crow was not just in the South, right? But I'm speaking about the Southern experience and how that iteration and how that version of Jim Crow savagery, how that version of apartheid had a very specific outcome and created very specific experiences for people like my parents, right? And I think this is what I'm trying to say, like, how much of our Black experience has influenced not just our opinions on things like policing, but it influences so many other types of expression. And I think, like, before we just come to these really neat and convenient conclusions about this establishment, this institution, this practice, we really do have to apply we have to think about the survivorship of Jim Crow. I can't. And again, I said this on Twitter. Maybe it's because I was born to Jim Crow refugees that I refuse to look at an issue, especially when it talks about the different generations, right? When reference to different generations kind of coming together and trying to organize, I refuse to just, like, sideline the very real complicated thing that is, this person survived Jim Crow, and not making them a victim, but acknowledging that their survivorship experience, it informs their politics, right? I think we have to understand that. We have to understand that and not expect them to be this old, like, and it runs the gamut. You still have very progressive, rebellious voices. You had the Denmark Vesey's, who I would characterize as extremely progressive, right? Existing at a time when you probably couldn't even imagine what I can, but but you probably can't imagine that type of rebellious spirit existing in a place like Charleston at that time where there still was a prohibition on black bodies existing outside of providing labor, right? So like just knowing that kind of trauma triggers all different types of responses, know that then if it was true then, it's true now, right? For every Denmark Vesey, you got the snitch or the snitches that told on them because they were afraid of what that type of rebellion could yield in their community, right? So that's what I'm trying to challenge people to see is like Jim Crow, being black in America triggers all types of responses, in so many different ways, and we have to allow for grace for that.
Which leads to hip hop, R&B and hip hop. So there's that linkage between the past and the present. The Harriet Tubman piece originated from an article I was reading about how she was supposed to be on the $20 bill. This artist made a stamp that goes over the
still ain't on the $20 bill, which
the $20 bill, so that her face is stamped on it. And so I was reading some of the quotes from Harriet Tubman, and one of the quotes was about how she believed the slave owners would go to heaven because she said they acted to their own impulses, that they didn't know any better, basically. And I thought from a woman who had seen what she had seen, had gone through what she had gone through, to have that level of empathy was just absolutely astonishing to me. But that empathy did not affect the resoluteness of her cause. So
right, not like this is the thing too. This is why I get fed up with certain conversations, especially on Twitter. I'm just the old, crotchety curmudgeon. Like I don't know how people would view that statement by Harriet Tubman, but to me, it's like, okay, she didn't forget her humanity. She still was with the shits, right? She still was burning down plantations and saving over 700 people from slavery with the Combahee River Raid. She still was rescuing people. She still came back for her no good, no count husband who had threatened to tell on her, who had then remarried. She coming down with a new suit, trying to scoop up her boo. She still she has so much compassion for people who brought her pain and like empathy. I'm like, I wish I could be like that. I'm petty as fuck. I'm petty as hell. But someone like, but being serious, someone like with Harriet Tubman, who was involved in such righteous, such bold acts of not just like such bold acts of rebellion, how she didn't lose her humanity, like she didn't lose touch with humanity and empathy. And I think, again, why I hopped on this morning is like, no, let's talk about this policing thing. Yeah, we got Clyburn over here doing Clyburn things. Yeah, we got members of the squad saying something completely different, right? But like, how did these brown people, how did these different aspects of the BIPOC community, how did they get to these conclusions about the same thing, get to such vastly different conclusions about the same thing? And instead of just saying, no, they're horrible, they're old, their time has come and gone, which I could argue, yes, hyper tenure is not a good thing in Clyburn's case. I don't think being in office is a birthright, right? We don't have kings and queens, supposedly, allegedly. But at the same time, let's understand someone like Jim Clyburn, who came through the civil rights movement, a whole civil rights icon, right? Let's figure out how he got to where he got to in terms of policing. And of course, we know that folks is trying to win elections too.
Initially, I saw the shackles as just glasses, the sunglasses, and I decided to put the rose-colored lens in there because of her optimism that she had about slavery. And that's the way, once again, through her perspective, the reality was being framed by slavery, but what she was seeing, she had a lot of optimism, about the future. When it comes to the plantation tree of life.
Okay, so I'm gonna hop out of that. And I want to hop over to, real quick, again, subversive art I know this conversation might feel like it's all over the place, but again, I'm more interested in having a conversation about how black political expression and how and the things that shaped it and experiences that shaped it, and people who are able to talk about that expression. And usually for me, I love relying on artistry. I love poetry from this era. I love a scholarship from this era as well. But I feel like art makes these subversive art makes these very interesting arguments, compelling arguments about these institutions. So this was the PDF that goes along with Colin Kwashi's linked exhibition that was at the Halsey, right? So there's different types of, you know, he does a lot of, I want to say mixed media, but I don't know if that's appropriate. But these are like mixed media types of installation where he takes these very visceral, very like real aspects of the enslavement of Africans in the South, and he talks about that, right? And so he does make a statement on policing. Let me blow this up real quick. From cell to cell, right? So this is what I love. So if you went to link, you would have saw this as well. The slave went free. The slave went free. Stood a belief. This is W.B. Du Bois, excuse me. A brief moment in the sun, then moved back again towards slavery. And you're talking about, y'all know about this, right? How slavery really wasn't abolished, right? So the Civil War ended slavery and disseminated the Southern economy. To rebuild, white leaders and politicians exploited the 13th Amendment provisions, allowing slavery, quotation marks, and involuntary servitude, quotation marks, to continue as punishment for crime. Black men were arrested and convicted for petty offenses such as vagrancy, which brought large fines few could pay. They were then leased, this is leasing, prison convict leasing. They then were leased to private and state companies where the opportunities for profit were enormous. 90% of leased convicts were black. This is not today's time. This is back after the fall of slavery, y'all. All right. So 90% of leased convicts were black. Today's prison systems are increasingly privatized, subsidized by government contracts to pay a certain amount of money per day per prisoner. Tough on crime politics with racist undertones and mandatory sentencing laws applied in racially desperate ways has quadrupled incarceration rates since the 1970s. So you feel so in some ways, like I can see, again, going back to Septima Clark's quotes about how the integration of the Charleston police force to her signaled justice, signaled hope, right? That optimism, maybe something similar to what Harriet Tubman felt in terms of optimism, right? But then we start seeing, as time goes by, you saw it there because they started apprehending all kinds of black people. Like these innocent black people were stolen, were disappeared, and put in these labor camps to help these farmers who have lost that free workforce, to help subsidize, their losses. So just seeing this evolution of policing, of the incarceration or the carceral state in America, and again, it's so unique to, like, the South plays such a big role in this, in perfecting this practice and creating this practice. Excuse me. All right, there's another installation that tackles policing within the Links series. Here it is right here. Now, I posted this on MLK's birthday because you know how white folk love to just quote this dude, all the positive stuff, concept of the character and I have a dream, right? But they don't really dive deep. So here, Colin Kwashi, his installation was featuring Martin Luther King here, a famous mugshot of MLK with the slave badge here, right? But then he recreated, I'm gonna zoom in more. Then he wrote something else on the slave badge. So it says servant. It says Charleston, servant, 1968. So he reconfigured it to make a statement. Let's read this part. Servant. Slave tags were worn by skilled enslaved people leased out by their master and identified the type of work they were permitted to do. These urban slaves, quotation marks, these urban slaves were required by law to be licensed and to display the badge at all times. All right. This is the origins, y'all, of modern day policing in America. Started here in Charleston. started here. How do you keep track on these slaves, these cooks, and these these other types of workers, of skilled slaves, skilled enslaved labor? How do you keep tabs on them? You had to create a system to help police bodies, right? And remember, policing is to protect property. Black people as chattel, or seen as chattel, they were property, right? That's what policing was created to do, was to protect property. All right, I'm gonna keep going. All right, so these urban slaves were required by law to be licensed and to display the badge at all times. The only city known to have implemented this regulatory system is Charleston, South Carolina. Excerpt from Dr. Martin Luther King's last sermon at Ebenezer Baptist Church, entitled "The Drum Major Instinct." And see, this is the part, like, white folk don't like to trot this one out, right? I'm going to encourage you to read this. I posted this on MLK's birthday about that, about the statements there. But I really think that y'all should read this in regards to Colin Quashie is the shit. Like, awesome. And it's just so impactful. But I love the fact that, like, within all of these art installations, he includes that bit of Charleston history. I am, for fun, even though this is not deal with policing per se, I am for fun going to go down to the plantation wedding. Here we go. The wedding party. For some, I want to throw this in for a little bonus. For some, the award-winning film 12 Years a Slave offered a glimpse into the searing interior of a plantation. We're going to call them labor camps too, right? Outside of this piece, we refer to them as labor camps. That's what they were. All right. For others, it was a well-produced feature-length wedding video. Ooh. So yeah, when you watch movies like 12 Years a Slave, I know for me as a black person, right? Of course, I can only watch 12 Years a Slave once. I have major critique about the violent images we saw, especially in regards to black women's bodies and the hypersexualization of black women. It was very hard for me to even try to revisit, right? But I like what Colin Quashie's saying here. Like, when you watch these movies that take place on a labor camp, what do you see? Because I see savagery, I see atrocity, I see genocidal tactics, I see torture, I see a lot of things. I see child exploited black labor, I see exploited children's labor, I see black women and no bodily autonomy, I see capitalism being born literally through a black woman's body, and all that. That's what I see. But we know here in Charleston plantation, this is probably why he doesn't get the Jonathan Green treatment right here. I think this piece alone, the white wedding cake figurines. So yeah, I thought that was real slick. So this is crazy, right? So the sentimentalization of plantations engenders a dangerous and selective nostalgia, which omits the crimes, rape, abuse, and dehumanization of blacks and replaces them with the commercial gloss of the big white wedding. Severely edited narration also underscores the continued devaluation of an entire people and the systemic erasure of a part of history that needs to be recognized. Many plantation wedding venues have replaced terms like slaves with workers and have shuttered slave quarters to become private residences. Most choose not to mention the S word, slavery. The proliferation of plantation weddings is being fueled in part by an increasing popularity of social media sites such as Pinterest, The Knot. CVB is not a social media site, but they also sell this on their website, right? Charleston hates a critic. You ain't lying. Evelyn, they hate a critic and they don't know what real art is, so that's why they hate critics. I'm not talking about black artists and people who really do create good art here. I'm talking about the establishment, the powerful establishments that work hard to not to democratize artistic spaces and artistic expression. But yeah, sites like Pinterest, The Knot was one. I just threw that in there, which hosts a swollen archive of affluent affairs on historic landmarks, entirely divorced from the atrocities of slavery. That's all I got to say. That's from. Okay, according to wedding industry's analysis, 1 in 3 engaged couples use Pinterest to plan their weddings. Yeah, one in 3. Wow. And who's the number 2 wedding destination? What's the number 2 wedding destination city in America? I believe it's Charleston. Right? I believe it's Charleston. All right, so I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk. Oh, there was some more serve and protect. There's policing. Oh, let me read this real quick. I skipped right over this. Observe and reject. Right. So this is commentary on George Zimmerman. We know that George Zimmerman murdered a child who was walking home with Skittles and a tea because he thought Trayvon was doing something and got off. I don't know. To this day, I don't know how this man was found not guilty. To this day, stand your ground laws. Wow. You can kill a child. And because that child was getting the best of you, that justified you pulling out a firearm and murdering that child for walking back home with the tea and some Skittles. To this day, I'll never understand that. Like, it breaks my heart. All right, so I'm going to look at this commentary right here. Again, this is why I love art like this that really challenges these things, that really complicates our relationship to these institutions. Policing is a relatively modern invention, with the first organization being created in Boston in 1863, right? Slave patrols were created in Carolina colonies in 1704 and were centered in the preservation of slavery. So we see these first 2 iterations, Boston and Carolina. Think about what they got in common. Hello, right? So yeah, so again, let me read that sentence again. Slave patrols were created in the Carolina colonies in 1704 and were centered on the preservation of slavery. In many states, it became required duty for white men to serve. You hear what I'm saying? So like, this is the other thing too about like, well, the deputy, like how these men would be deputized by law enforcement, right? Okay, so like this random old, tobacco spitting, clan meeting having white folk probably just deputized to in some way, shape, or form to either run literal slave patrols or, as that evolved, to just police black bodies at will. Like there were literal laws on the books that prevented black people from having firearms and protecting themselves, and definitely you couldn't pull a firearm on a white person like that. There were laws there too, right? All right. So yeah, in many states it became required duty for white men to serve. Patrollers have traveled through the countryside looking for blacks, wow, who were not where they belonged. Now, fast forward to Columbia, to the Summit neighborhood incident that we just experienced last week, that we just caught wind of last week, right? A white neighbor, no shoes, challenging the literal presence, just the presence of a black person in a neighborhood because he wasn't familiar with who they were. He couldn't distinguish who they were and why they were there, right? So we see how these attitudes are shaped over time, right? But I really wanted to point out like that how deep that the roots of modern day policing, how deep the roots are and how the roots run right here, bring us right back to places like Charleston, which created the slave patrols, right, and perfected that practice, and how that slave patrol practice then expanded and was shared widely throughout other places in the country, right? Let me keep reading though. This is kind of interesting. I paid less attention to this part than I did the other pieces. Patrollers traveled through the countryside looking for blacks who were, quote, not where they belonged. During Reconstruction and thereafter, many local sheriffs function in ways analogous to slave patrols by disenfranchising free blacks and through the application of Jim Crow and segregation. Many black communities face high crime rates and want good relationships with law enforcement. Look at this again. Okay, when we talk about conservative black folk, right, and how their opinions are shaped over time, many black communities face high crime rates and want good relationships with law enforcement, but the distrust is historic. Black Americans continue to see police as enforcers of a systemic inequality and their policing methodology, right? Most enduring aspect of the struggle for civil rights. Okay. So I just think that was profound. And again, subversive art tells such great stories, has the ability to tell such great stories. And so if you haven't made yourself familiar with the work of Colin Quashie, another Charleston area artist that, let me stop. But they just go to the same dudes over and over again. They go to the same affable men over and over and over again. And I'm not trying to impugn their integrity. I'm saying, but there's other stories to be told. And they talk about complex issues like policing, like plantation weddings. And I just don't understand. I do understand. I also wanted to, there were some videos. Let me see. I want to go back to YouTube. Let me go back. And there was a video that debuted. Going back again. You know what? Let me go forward. Let me mute. And let me go to my history here. Yeah. So there were some other videos that I've used over the years about policing, about the history of policing. Let me see. Here we go. From Slave Patrol. This is a popular one. This is one that was very, very insightful. Let me unmute it.
Today's baggage, how slavery helped create modern-day policing. Let's take it back to 1619, when a group of several hundred Africans were kidnapped from their village, forced onto a Portuguese ship, only to be stolen by English pirates at sea. After a voyage filled with horror and death, what's referred to as some 20 and odd Negroes arrived in the New World and were sold in a place now known as Virginia. Yes, enslaved Africans were in the New World before your beloved Pilgrims. These few Africans survived the perils of the transatlantic slave trade, which had been underway since the 1500s in the Western Hemisphere. During the slave trade, Africans were captured and forcibly brought to the Americas in ginormous numbers. Historians say that from 1526 to 1867, something like 12.5 million enslaved people were stolen from Africa and journeyed to the Americas. Only about 11 million arrived alive. Back to 1619. Those who did survive the horrors of the slave trade and were brought to what would become the U.S. were also subjected to the first form of organized policing in the South, known as the Slave Patrol. In case you missed it, the Slave Patrol and slave catchers were the first form of organized police in the South. These watching as well.
And she about to say something funny. Let me rewind it. And where did it start, class? In Charleston.
First form of organized police in the South. These watching as white folks first emerged in the colony of Carolina in the early 1700s and set the tone for policing as we know it. The Slave Patrol kept tabs on the whereabouts of the enslaved. And that meant if black men and women were off a plantation, then the Slave Patrol could demand to see a slave badge noting their occupation. Slave Patrol could stop and search whomever's belongings just because. Now, I wonder who that sounds like. Then there was the slave catchers. That role is pretty self-explanatory. Slave catchers chased and returned runaways. They also intentionally scared the bejesus out of the enslaved to instill a sense of fear and prevent revolts. There was some overlap between the role of the slave catcher and the slave patrol, but together they enforced the idea that black people were second-class citizens and that white people were the authority. And organized police departments, they enforced this racial hierarchy too. In South Carolina, for example, by 1837, there were dozens of officers in the Charleston Police Department whose jobs were essentially to monitor the enslaved. And though slavery was abolished after the Civil War, the spirit of tracking and policing black folks lived on. During the Reconstruction era, black codes were enacted with the quickness, and they restricted how black folks could live their lives. David A. Harris is a law professor at the University of Pittsburgh. Harris specializes in law enforcement and race, so y'all know we're gonna have a lot to talk about. How did black people's relationship with law enforcement change after emancipation?
Law enforcement often was cast in the role of enforcing Jim Crow laws and other kinds of laws aimed at maintaining the racial caste system and at keeping black people, quote, in their place. So law enforcement, to the extent it existed, would be one thing for white people and another entirely for black people. It was aimed at maintaining the racial separation that existed and their system of racial privilege for whites and second-class, at best, citizenship for blacks. And this...
I cannot watch some of this footage of like these like, it's so tough to see black bodies experience the type of violence. It's so damn tough. And then like it feels like today, it feels like we're in some ways not even going to try to say that we're back in those times, but the fact that cops can kill with impunity, the fact that black bodies are just seen as nuisances to be policed, to be surveilled, it's so fucking difficult. It's so fucking difficult. Like, it's just, again though, what I'm trying to do, and I might be doing a sloppy job of doing this, I'm trying to imagine the trauma responses that this lived experience or this learned experience, if it was passed down to you, like it might have been in part passed down to me, how that can shape opinions, how a little bit of progress might feel like justice and tremendous relief to somebody. I'm trying to understand why, like, if black bodies aren't treated in police the way they were so explicitly back in the day, how someone could arrive at the conclusion that, okay, we've come far. We've got black police chiefs. We've got, you know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to understand that I am not interested or invested in just criticizing a conservative viewpoint that I don't share, that I find troubling, problematic, and destructive. I just don't have any interest in vilifying people who own those values, especially when you watch something like this. How can you not think about all of the other ways, all the ways that this type of thing can make someone react and respond? How you can then come out of this and have a set of anti-black views because you've correlated blackness with being illegal, or you've correlated blackness with being ugly, right? So think about all the other ways that we've internalized anti-blackness. And again, I'm not trying to say that older black Americans internalize anti-blackness more than us or anything. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that imagine living through this and seeing how powerful all of this violence is, and how it might make someone think, well, I don't want to be nowhere near that. I want to get closer to the white power structure. I want to assimilate so that this terror is less of my reality. I hope that makes sense. I'm not trying to oversimplify or over empathize with people. I'm just imagining all of these varied responses to our history here in this country.
Only exist in the South. There were certainly law enforcement efforts that did the same thing in northern cities and towns.
But in the South, the system of racism wasn't just upheld by law enforcement. Vigilante groups like the Ku Klux Klan played a massive role in terrorizing black communities with lynchings and other forms of violence.
You would find many powerful and prominent people to have been members of the KKK, including law enforcement. You would think today nobody in law enforcement would want to be out front as a member of the KKK. Of course, you wouldn't see that. But in those days...
That's changed greatly. We got insurrectionists bragging about how they posted pictures of themselves participating in insurrection, and then they could turn around and get a permit from the city of Charleston to hold an event. So that's changed greatly. You can be part of a hate group and it not be anywhere near have any consequences.
It was acceptable for many kinds of leading citizens to be involved, and law enforcement was no exception.
Case in point, Hugo Black, an ex-Klan member who went on to become a member of the U.S. Supreme Court. I digress. So for the most part, it was the responsibility of the police to uphold the law of the land, which in the...
Side note, I really want her hair. Like, I want it bad. And her eyebrows.
South meant enforcing segregation. Police were oppressive and violent. This was well documented during the Civil Rights Movement, when at times they were...
Trigger warning. Golly, I can't watch this stuff without... Oof.
...riot gear while using hoses and dogs on peaceful protesters. Why is the imagery of the police dog so important?
So you don't have to go far back into history to imagine people running away from slavery being tracked by dogs. But then we have actual documentary evidence in which we see dogs used as instruments of law enforcement and utter terror and just as weapons in the civil rights era. It's a weapon, literally, for law enforcement purposes, like a club or a gun would be, and it is also a message from history. Dogs have been used before in contexts like this, and they're being used now.
They sure are. This picture was taken just a few years ago in Ferguson. I think this is what they call deja vu. It's law enforcement who use dogs and other weapons of violence to instill fear in Black people. But the irony is that trigger-happy policing is in part caused by stereotypical fears held by the officers themselves. Darren Wilson, the officer who shot and killed Michael Brown, used fear as a defense, likening the unarmed team to a demon. Police killings of unarmed Black and brown people have gone on way before Michael Brown, and sadly will continue after him.
That's Yusef Hawkins. That's from the 80s, I believe. Oh, no. That was Eric Garner. They just used the older picture, a younger picture rather, of him.
Black and brown people have gone on way before Michael Brown.
I think that was Eric Garner.
Sadly will continue after him. Police are 2 times as likely to use force against Black and brown folks.
And Yusef Hawkins was not killed by police. He was killed by an angry mob of white Italian kids in Bensonhurst.
Than white folks. We also know that policing tactics like stop and frisk, as well as racial profiling, are terribly discriminatory. Here it says that racial profiling by police has evolved to fit whatever agenda they might have against people of color in the US, targeting Black and Latinx people during the crack epidemic, Muslims after 9/11, and Central American migrants up until today.
Yeah, we see that here. I'm gonna hop out of this video. I thought, especially the beginning part, tying modern day policing, or rather showing you the origins of policing, and how it started here in the Carolina colonies. Thought that was very important. It's an oldie but goodie. It's from 2019, but it's still a very, very good video from the root that gets down to it. So I don't enjoy it, but I appreciate that video. There was something else too that popped up. Admittedly, I have not watched this at all, but again, we're talking about slave patrols, right? So let's watch this. Let me rewind it. Right. Again, what the conversation I'm interested in having is the evolution of slavery. The evolution of modern day policing, starting from slavery, slave patrols that were started here in the Carolina colonies, and so on and so forth. We're trying to have this conversation and also trying to understand various opinions or various thoughts on that before I wrap it up, because I know I've been talking for a minute. And this is like an impromptu Sunday Twitch session, but I wanted to hop on. Had some things to say, and Twitter was not going to be the place for that.
I grew up with this idea, or at least I was told, that police are here to protect us. And I think that a lot of the conversations you see...
Shout out Rutgers. I didn't go to Rutgers. I actually got denied. But I did start my master's at Rutgers that I didn't finish. Shout out Rutgers. I'm a Jersey girl.
Being across the country are basically asking the question, well, wow, police are here to protect us. Why does it seem like at least a lot of communities feel like that's not happening?
See, how long is this program?
This is David Cooper, a retired Wisconsin police chief with over 30 years of experience. He's been on the front line fighting for change inside police departments for years now.
Well, should we start at slave patrols? Yep, that was slave patrols.
Slave patrols were an organized group of armed white men who would monitor and enforce discipline upon black slaves in the 1800s.
And then that kind of morphed into Jim Crow.
Jim Crow, the black codes. I don't know why he's in his car. No shade. But was this made during the pandemic? Let me see. Okay, yeah. Okay. Maybe things was really tight back then. Back last July.
And it was quite obvious about whose side the police were on. I mean, there wasn't any question. If you were a person of color and you had a beef about how a white person or a store owner or somebody who treated you, forget about it. You're going to jail.
My name is Chinjirai Kumanika, and I'm an assistant professor.
They could have got somebody else to talk, like the previous clip. Like, that just was all over the place. I have not watched this.
Professor and
some of these some of these producers were trying to probably throw together all kinds of content that even just mentioned policing, policing in America, but that was underwhelming.
Department of Journalism and Media Studies. What you have to understand is that in early America, right, a lot of the wealth was made. I mean, the wealth was basically made by exploiting labor.
Not basically.
And so
explicitly.
In the South and places where slavery was, the economic system, that meant you're exploiting slave labor. What you see is from the beginning,
not only that, the illegal seizure of property and land from the indigenous peoples.
Departments have kind of a racist function. I see a lot of people,
and indigenous genocide.
Talking about this, and they'll say, well, our police are broken, but we have to reestablish trust. The question I would say is, okay, but if the police are broken, what year in American history did the police break? If you're talking about reestablishing trust, can you point to the year in American history where there was a foundation of trust between the Black community, for example?
That's a good question.
And police officers. Are you going to say that there was trust between the Black community during Jim Crow in the 20s? But a lot of police officers have found it hard actually to do that job.
Well, it's always been tense. When I worked on the street in Minneapolis, after Dr. King was slain, and the north side of Minneapolis most of the businesses were burned and looted. I decided we had to do something different. I was just a patrol officer at the time. I went to the captain of my station, the Northside Station, and I said, I think we should put a footbeat down in the Black community. And I said, I want an exemption to one department rule. I don't want to have to wear my hat this summer because I want people to know who I am. And if I wear my hat, somebody might...
I don't know about this, sir.
...shoot me thinking I was one of those other officers.
David did see a change. He was able to connect with local citizens on a personal level. He realized that by showing respect, he would receive it back in return.
Yeah, okay. We're going to stop it there. I don't know what the fuck the producers are doing with that. Not trying... interesting. But there was some interesting points made there. There was something else that I wanted to see. But you know what? Because, let me see. Because I don't know. I didn't watch the full clip. I don't want to watch something like that last one that wasn't it. But I guess I can wrap it up here. It was just a quick impromptu Twitch chat. I kind of wanted to just stress the point. I'll switch sleep. Stress the point that there's two things. I kind of went all over the place, but Jaboji. Yeah, I kind of went all over the place. If you can, like, I've been on for about been on for an hour. So like at the beginning, the way I prefaced this conversation was, it's really disappointing. Actually, you know what? That's what I wanted to see. I'm gonna go. It's disappointing, right? To see Whip Clyburn policing. To see Whip Clyburn and other Black folk who have come through Jim Crow South, who are literal civil rights figures. Let me switch back. It's disheartening to hear such like conservative views on police. I would be lying to you if I didn't say that I don't suck my teeth, roll my eyes when I hear shit like this. Let's go.
Majority Whip Clyburn, thanks so much for joining us today. We have a lot.
But what I'm not what I'm not interested in doing is just completely throwing this man away and this viewpoint away, because I think there's a lot here to learn from. And I'm encouraging folks like myself who do identify as progressive to not necessarily it's not about finding common ground or anything like that. It's not about that. It's understanding, with this, make this distinction too. So you've got the conservative thoughts that my mom and my dad might have about police. My mom and dad don't trust the police like that. Like, they don't call the police. Like, they don't call the police. They don't. Like, I was raised, we don't call the police. Like, that's how I was raised. Wasn't no militant Black Panther shit and nothing like that. They just don't trust the police. They grew up in the South. We don't call the white men in our house, right? right? So that's one, and they're 70 and 80. So there's one viewpoint on it, and then there's people my parents' age that are like Clyburn, that have no political agenda. This is all politics. This is all leading from a position of fear. But this is also how like Biden became the nominee too. Unfortunately, this is how Biden became the nominee. We're striking these notes that prey upon Black people's fears. Black people's fears in terms of like, well, we want to be practical and pragmatic as we try to fight for justice or try to move toward anything that even resembles justice, right? So let me just play this.
A lot to get to, but I do want to start on the shooting.
And we're not watching this whole 7 minutes, but let's just get this.
Of Rayshard Brooks, the Atlanta police chief has now resigned. Protesters are very angry.
Actually, this is from this morning. So he was on CNN earlier this week. But I'm sure, like, but this is why I clicked on it, because it says James Clyburn says he does not support defunding the police. So Dems, the moderate centrist corporate Dems have been on a tear, getting in front of every camera they can get in front of to say, no, we ain't defunding the police. We know they just killed a kid, a 7th grader, but we're not defunding the police because of elections, right? But it's this leading from a position of fear that I really resist.
They've been tear gassed. Some set fire to a Wendy's there. What's your reaction when you saw the video of that police shooting?
Well, thank you very much for having me, Jay.
Wait a minute.
I was very incensed over that. And
No, this is the wrong one. My bad, y'all. This is the wrong one. I'm like, wait a minute, Rayshard Brooks. Here we go. My bad. I'm sure it's the same. This is how, hold up. This is how crazy it is. It's the same talking points as last year. Where is it? Let me see. Let me just take CNN out of it. Jim Clyburn. Damn. No, what? Filters this week. This is the universe saying pack it in. Here it is. Nope. Vaccinations, equality. 4 days ago. Is this it? No. Well, this is interesting. I know Tlaib is like, nah, we need to fund it all. Let's play this real quick. Let me see this.
As tensions continue to flare over American law enforcement, a Michigan congresswoman tweets that it's time to do away with policing.
So this what got the corporate Dems hot right here. This is why they all run into every camera, right? So Rashida Tlaib tweeted this on the 12th. It wasn't an accident. Policing in our country is inherently and intentionally racist. Daunte Wright was met with aggression and violence. I am done with those who condone government-funded murder. No more policing, incarceration, and militarization. It cannot be reformed. I couldn't agree more with the sentiment. I mean, it's not as easy as a tweet, but I feel her 100%. It can't be reformed.
Did she mean it? Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib is here, and the Michigan coronavirus surge.
So let's see if we can get to Tlaib real quick, right? Let's see if we can get there, and then I'm gonna try to find the Clyburn part.
Another Black man dying at the hands of police. It was time to do away with policing and incarceration. It was insanity to those on the right, and it was even a bridge too far for some of her colleagues on the left, like Bernie Sanders. But it wasn't the only headline for Democrats this week, as a plan was put forth to add 4 justices to the Supreme Court, as was a plan to try to study the idea of reparations for slavery. A lot to discuss with Rashida Tlaib today on Flashpoint. You know, it can be difficult for the newer members of Congress to break through to be heard among 435 voices in the House. But as a member of the so-called squad, Rashida Tlaib has been a lightning rod, and she was again this week with a tweet that took aim at police violence and called for an end to policing and incarceration. That was just part of a very busy week on Capitol Hill.
And like, you know, what really like what I'd love to see more of. I'd love to see more of this, right? So, right, when I said it wasn't as easy as a tweet, I wasn't trying to demean this effort. You need this, right? Like, so knowing that she knows this, that tweeting this is not going to convert millions of centrist Democrats to her viewpoint, right? She knows that. But there's power in being this declarative in your call for abolishing this carceral state, right? There's so much power in doing this that I wish more people did it, and stop worrying about winning elections and start leading from a position of power and conviction, right? So like, I wish more people did this and didn't hedge because, and I know that you have to play the game and you have to win elections. I get that. I think there's a way for you to be honest. Like, I honestly think that I don't understand why. I'm not saying be like Trump, but I'm saying we saw someone unapologetically racist win an election. Right? Not only win an election, he was the fuel, the accelerant behind this movement that started up years ago, predated Trump by decades, but he was the accelerant to this movement of white folk, this white male grievance or this white grievance, right? Economic grievance, whatever bullshit. Like all these types of grievances wrapped up, anti-immigrant grievance, anti-black grievance, all of that. He was the fuel, the accelerant. And he was riddled with imperfections, and he spoke to his base. So I don't understand, like, what the fear is exactly behind speaking your truth this declaratively. Like, I mean, this is the clinic in how to just like talk your shit.
I'm so glad to have Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib back with us again today on Flashpoint. Congresswoman, I appreciate the time, and right from the jump, let's start with your tweet, which obviously your usual detractors jumped all over it, but so did some of the people that we consider, I think, to be your allies, people like Jim Clyburn and Bernie Sanders. You want to explain a little bit about what it was you meant and how you feel like the reaction to it has gone?
Yeah, I think for many of us, we see continuing this investment in policing to address homelessness in our country, to address children that are struggling in school. You know, I grew up in a school where we had counselors and nurses, and now those folks have been replaced by police. And that is not helping people be safe in our country. We also have over and over again seen across the nation more Black lives killed by state-funded government, that's policing, with no sense of accountability at all. And I think for many of us, especially myself, I truly believe in investing in our communities, especially when we see budgets like $300 million for Detroit Police Department, while only $8 to $9 million for public.
300. Did she say? Did I hear that right? Did I hear that right? I mean, hear that?
Our communities, especially when we see budgets like $300 million for Detroit.
$300 million? Almost $500 million?
Police Department, while only $8 to $9 million for public health. And we wonder why so many of our neighbors are with COVID, or so many of our neighbors are struggling with public health issues. Our communities deserve more. We deserve an investment in our people and not invested in criminalizing the poor and targeting people.
Now, y'all know I love a savvy politician. Y'all know I don't stand politicians, but I love when they do right. And what she just did was was when you saw expertise in motion. Talk about the services. It's like people have taken defund the police to me, and they've done this on purpose, right? It's intentional, right? It's willful to misconstrue the sentiments behind defund the police. $300 million compared to $9 million a public health budget, $9 million public health budget, and they still killing us, and they still killing kids. $300 million. And what I would love to see with the Clyburn and them is, but you know, they have to capitulate to their donor base, to certain labor unions that still have a stronghold, certain blue collar working class factions that still have a stronghold. It's diminishing though, right? But they still have to talk to meet their concerns and also some other bullshit. But I would love for them to talk about that disproportionate allocation of resources to the police taken from the community. And like we see that here in Charleston with the Charleston Police Department occupying more and more spaces in our schools as SROs, after school, summer camps, ice cream trucks, being on the blacktop, basketball, whatever, like a book drive that I just found out about, some sort of book. Why are the police occupying these spaces? And all it serves to do is to justify all this. This is a campaign. This is a concerted effort that justifies their presence, that normalizes their presence in places where we used to see counselors, where we used to see school nurses, where we used to see other types of services offered to, or not just our kids, but to our public at large. A lot of this that's why the propaganda that Sheriff Graziano engages in is so problematic. Like, I don't need you. I don't need you handing out groceries to underserved communities. I need you to figure out why y'all killed Jamal Sutherland and how you can prevent those deaths from happening again. And then I want to also ask you how you're going to bring down the rate of those who are in your custody. And then I want to, there's so many other questions, so many other concerns that I think that the sheriff should be focused on. The juvenile justice system and all that other stuff, all that cleanup from Al Cannon. I need you over there. I don't need you at Hart Gap Middle School handing out produce. All right. And showing I don't need that. Right. I need you to actually account for some of these and right the wrongs, that was done by your predecessor, by you as a cop too. So that's the thing. I don't know. We've normalized cops showing up in these spaces and we don't push back on, hey, do we really need a cop here addressing food insecurity? Do we really need a cop here addressing food insecurity? Or could we actually, I don't know, reconfigure their budget to make sure that these safety nets are in place, and not just with another motherfucking nonprofit, with the government that is charged with taking care of its community. Our city government outsources so much of their responsibility. It's almost like you can't hold them accountable because it doesn't even fall within their purview anymore. Like, you've given the police in Charleston so much access to Parks and Rec and so much space to govern those spaces that it's almost like the city doesn't run this shit no more. So if I want to have a rally at Brittlebank Park, why is my first contact the police department? Why is he telling me about, like we've normalized police serving in certain functions and serving in certain capacities, and that's just got to stop. That's just got to stop. I don't even want to keep playing that. I think I found it. Let me see. That's why I always spell her name wrong. I always spell her name wrong. It's right there in my face too. No. All right, that's it. That's the universe telling me to pack it in. All right. So yeah, just a conversation. I see 3 people watching. It's a conversation. Hopefully it was food for thought for some people. I don't know. All I know, it's not cookie cutter. It's not cookie cutter. It's not cut and dry. I think that's what I'm trying to say. It's not cut and dry. It's not simple. Being pro-police and Black is very complicated, and I just want to encourage people to have and share dialogue about it, and not necessarily vilify folks who don't think like we do, folks who don't see the issue the way we do, who are not progressive. I think it's important for us to I think it's important for us to understand why certain people are motivated to say what they say. Now, outside of Clyburn, that's politically motivated. But outside of Clyburn, there are other people who hold views that he gives voice to, and we need to understand what that response. To me, it's a response to trauma. Whether it's lived or learned, it's a response to trauma, right? Lived experience or learned, right? To me, it is. So that keeping that in mind, I'm going to ask more questions. I'm going to keep asking why. I'm going to be extraordinarily Socratic with it to understand why it is that certain Black people hold these values. And not, I'm not really invested in vilifying them or making them feel shame. Now, if you out here cooning and being a modern day overseer, Black overseer, and you out here being the Samuel L. Jackson character from Django, that's different. That's different. But if you are just old grandma so-and-so from the Rosemont area and you think the police is a positive good, let's have a dialogue, right? Let's encourage that. Let's chill out with the ageism on the left. I'm saying it as someone who is not young. So let's chill out with the ageism on the left. Let's seek to understand, and let's understand that the tentacles of our history of African enslavement, the vestiges of slavery are still things that we grapple with every day. There's still things that we contend. They have components that we still contend with every day. Right? So have grace for your people. All right? Take care, y'all.